So we've been on a journey in our sermon series, and we've gotten to the point in our sermon series where we've learned about the call of Jesus. The call of Jesus has come to us. Come is what Jesus says, come unto me, follow me. And that call of Jesus then leads us into a discipleship relationship with him, or an apprenticeship relationship with Jesus. And what that means then is that our life, as we accept the call of Jesus, our life is now orientated around three main goals. And those three main goals there are on the screen. Number one, to be with our rabbi, that is, to be with Jesus. Number two, it's to become like our rabbi, to become like Jesus. And number three, to do what our rabbi does. Now, we've looked at number one briefly, and we're actually going to come back to number one and number two and number three later on. We've looked at number one briefly. We're on number two right now, and that is becoming like our rabbi, that is becoming like Jesus. And this is based on the passage here in Luke chapter 6 and verse 40, where Jesus says, "A disciple is not above their teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will become like their teacher." That's where this passage is coming from. That's what the relationship that Jesus is talking about when he extends that invitation to come follow me. So that's where we're going to go from here. So last week, and this is what we're going to go over here on our sermon, we're going to talk about change, transformation, we're going to talk about definitions, and then we're going to look at processes in our sermon today. So last week, we talked about Lisa Allen. If you weren't here, if you missed the story, I encourage you to watch last week's sermon. We talked about Lisa's story, and Lisa's story was inspirational, the change and the transformation that took place in her life. But I don't know how many of you caught it or not, but here it is. The way that Lisa's story is written, there's no indication in her story that there was any kind of spiritual element to it. Did you guys catch that last week or not? I don't know if you guys caught that last week or not. Did you guys catch that? Did you guys catch that, right? There's some amazing changes that are going on in her life, right? She stopped smoking, and then she's able to turn her life around, make healthful choices, keep a job, pay off her debt. All right, it's an amazing, inspirational story, but at least the way it's written, at least the way it's told, there is apparently no spiritual dynamic to it. Or is there? Notice what it says here in the book Steps to Christ. Christ is the source of every right impulse. Did you guys catch that here? Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but notice what it says. Christ is the source of every right impulse. So if there's a right impulse out there, that's even just an impulse, that's just a desire, that's just a desire or an inclination to do something. If there's some good there, who is the source of it? Christ. And this is actually based here on John chapter 1 in verse 9, where the gospel tells us that Christ, the true light, he gives light to only Seventh-day Adventists. He gives light to he only gives light to Christians. He only gives light to the righteous. He gives light to everyone. Everyone, and in fact, I left the part out. Everyone in the world is what it says. And so if there is good out there, if there is something that's right out there, if there's truth out there, who is the source of that truth? So there is truth even outside of our four walls here of the Newport Richey Seventh-day Adventist Church. I don't know if you know that or not. There's good outside of these walls. There's righteousness outside of these walls. It kind of goes along the teaching of Jesus, where he says God makes the sun to shine on the righteous and on the unrighteous. He makes the rain to fall on the righteous and on the unrighteous. God blesses the righteous, and God also blesses the unrighteous as well, because he is the source of everything that is good. And I'm getting ahead of myself here, whether or not we're even aware of it or conscious of it. And so the quotation continues, Steps to Christ. Men and women will sometimes become ashamed of their sinful ways. That's kind of Lisa's story. She realized she wasn't in a good place. Men and women will sometimes become ashamed of their sinful ways, it says, and then they will give up some of their evil habits before they are even conscious. So, Lisa gave up one of her habits that she had, one of her bad habits. She gave up smoking, and she replaced it with new habits and with good habits. They will do this before they are even conscious that they are being drawn to Christ. Whenever they make an effort to reform from, again, a sincere desire, just even an impulse that is good, whenever they make a decision to reform from a sincere desire to do what is right, it is the power of Christ that is drawing them. An influence of which they are unconscious of is working upon the soul. And so we come back to Lisa's story, and yes, the way it's written is actually, the story is taken just from a secular book on change, and it's written, there's no indication that there's any spiritual element to it, and the authors, I think, are trying to get the point across that change is part of a natural development, and I agree that change is part of a natural development, but I also think that there's something more behind it, whether we are aware of it or not, conscious of it or not, but the Spirit of Christ is moving in our lives and in our hearts, even when we don't realize it. And so here, this is one of the most important points of the sermon today. So that Jesus becomes the active agent of change. Jesus is the active agent of change in our lives and in our families. Jesus is the active agent of change in our homes. Jesus is the active agent of change in churches. Jesus is the active agent of change in our community. And so this process now of becoming like our rabbi, this process of change, this process of growing, is known as spiritual formation. And it's based on this passage here of Romans chapter 12. And verse 2, where it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Did you guys catch that here? We're kind of delving into definitions now. I don't know if someone can give me an assist over here on the front row. Some deacons or deaconesses, we have a little disturbance here on the front row. If we can have somebody take care of that, I'd appreciate it. All right, Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. This is where this is coming from. This is where this is based on when we're talking about spiritual formation and spiritual transformation and change. It's coming from this passage here. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Do not conform, it says. Do you catch that word? Conform to the pattern of this world, right? You see, there is a schematic, and I mentioned this last week. There is a schematic that is taking place. The world, there are certain values in our world. Oh, is this all right, well, just take a minute here to maybe pause a little bit. I see all the eyeballs are going on my kids, and instead of me, eyeballs over here. But anyways, if we can maybe, and if we can move them to the back, I'd appreciate that. If we can move them to the back. You have my permission, just move them and take them to the back. So single moms, I'm getting just a little taste of what it's like. I don't know if you know or not, my wife is in Lithuania, and so, I'm getting a little taste, so of what it's like, just a little taste. What you do is amazing. Single moms, single parents, what you guys do is amazing. My heart goes out to you guys. All right, is that taken care of? All right. All right, good. All right, let's come back here. All right, this is where this is taken from, Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, all right? The concept of spiritual formation and spiritual transformation. Spiritual formation and spiritual transformation. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, the Apostle Paul says, do not conform, there's that word, form. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. There is a schematic that the world follows, and that's where the word pattern comes from. From the Greek, there's a schematic there. The world has certain values. The world has certain behaviors. The world has certain ways of doing, certain ways of living, certain ways of being. And the Apostle Paul is saying, no, don't be formed to that schematic, to that plan. Rather, I need you to be transformed. There's a key word, transformed. Metamorpheo, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that is, be formed into the image of Christ. This is where, when we talk about spiritual formation, this is where it's coming from. A transformation, a change in the form. Here's another one, Galatians chapter 4 and verse 19. This is the Apostle Paul. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth. I find that fascinating that he uses that imagery of childbirth because, help me out here, where else have we seen that terminology or that illustration being used of being born or of children, right? Where have we used that? John chapter 3, where Jesus is talking about unless you're born again. And so here the Apostle Paul is using that same imagery. My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed. Now, it's not the word metamorpheo, but it is the word morpheo there, formed. Formed until Christ is formed in you. And Paul has this burden for the church in Galatia. And the church in Galatia had different challenges, but it had different opportunities as well. And Paul is saying, what I want from you is that there may be a shaping and a forming of the believers in Galatia into the image of Christ. And so as the pastor here of the Newport Richey Church, and if you ask me, what's my plan, what's my goal, what are my ideas, what's my, maybe negatively, what's my agenda, what do I want to accomplish while I'm here? This is my burden right here. That the community of faith, that the believers here in Newport Richey, that you can become formed and shaped into the image of Christ. That we here, the body of believers here, that we can become people of love here in Newport Richey. If you want to know why I'm here and what my burden is and what I would like to accomplish during my time here, is so that we can become a people of love, so that we can become a people that are faithful, so that we can become people that are joyful, full of joy. How about that one? That we're people that when we come here, we smile. Because the Spirit of God is in us and there's joy, right? That we smile. We show some teeth, a little bit of teeth. The burden is from my heart that we can become people that are hopeful, that we are people of hope, that there's hope here, that there's hope in Newport Richey, that there isn't discouragement, but that there's hope here. Can we become people that are hopeful, that we can become people that are obedient? You don't know how easy that would make my job here if everyone was just obedient. Oh, to have an obedient church and obedient church members. That we could become, that we could be changed, that we could be formed to be a people who are kind, people who are patient, people who are understanding, people who are people of peace, people that are welcoming to everyone, no exceptions, everyone. In fact, when Jesus makes that call and he says, come unto me, all, everyone, whosoever, Jesus doesn't give any disclaimers. Welcoming for everyone. Oh, that we could become a friendly people, that we could become a hospitable people, that we could become a good people, humble people, courageous people, that we could become people of strength. Here's another passage. This is 2 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 3, verse 18, when we're talking about spiritual formation and transformation. Here it is. And we all, with unveiled faces, behold the glory of the Lord. We are being what? Oh, there's that word again. Do you see that same word there again? Metamorpheo, morpheo, again metamorpheo, the transformation, that we could be transformed into his image, the image of Christ by the Spirit of God. Amen. That's what we're talking about. Again, coming back to becoming like our rabbi. Change and transformation and spiritual transformation and spiritual formation. That's what we're talking about here. So here's the definition. What is spiritual formation? It is a process by which we are changed, by which we are forged. Now, not as a forgery. Now, I had to look up that word just to make sure. Not as a forgery, not as a counterfeit, but when I'm talking about being forged, that is forged in the fire, forged under pressure. And we're going to talk about suffering and the role that suffering plays in the future here. But the process by which we are changed, the process by which we are forged, the process by which we are molded and formed and shaped and transformed into the image of Christ. Some say that this process of change, this process of transformation, this process of becoming, some say that this is one of the most important undertakings of our entire life, asking ourselves the question, who am I becoming? Or maybe even, who am I and who am I becoming? Now, a few years ago, I don't know if you remember this or not, but this was popularized. Next slide, please. My clicker stopped working here. This was popularized a few years ago. I don't know if you've heard it or not. Resume virtues versus eulogy virtues. Have you guys heard about this? And so asking ourselves to spend a little time asking ourselves, where do we spend the majority of our time? Do we spend the majority of our time brushing up our resumes, or do we spend the majority of time brushing up on our eulogy? What are you guys talking about here? All right. This is what a resume virtue would look like. The things that you did in life, the work that you've done in your life, the accomplishments that you have accomplished in your life, the accolades that you've received in your life. Those are resume virtues. And I think a lot of us spend a lot of time there, spiffing up our resume, the things that we've done. But then there's eulogy virtues. What are eulogy virtues? Eulogy virtues are who you are or who you were, how people remember you, the fabric that makes up our character, the relationships that defined our sojourn on this earth. Those are eulogy virtues. Now, I heard it once said, and I don't know if this is applicable. I think it's applicable for organizations as well, as much as for individuals. But I've heard it said that people don't remember what you say. So as a pastor who gets up here week after week, and I say a lot, it gives me a little bit of pause to remember that people aren't going to remember what I say. And I even have heard it said that people don't remember what you do either. So there's a little bit of grace there, because if I do mess up, then hopefully people will forget some of the things that I did. But then they say, but people won't forget how you made them feel. Have you heard that? How do I make you feel as a pastor? How do you make other people feel when they're around you? How does this church and our organization make people feel when they walk through our doors? Remember that this call of Jesus, the call to discipleship, the call to become an apprentice of Jesus, when he extends that invitation, he says, "Come and learn of me." When he gives this invitation, the call of Jesus is not merely about learning information. And I feel that Western Christianity and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, just along with Western Christianity, we have focused a lot on right information and on right doctrine. And don't get me on, because it's important. Right information is important. But I sometimes feel that we spend a lot of time making sure that people know the right day to go to church on, or that they know what happens to people when they die. I feel that we've spent a lot of time on there to the neglect of something else, because when Jesus gives that invitation, he says, "Come unto me. Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And then he says, "Learn of me." He's not just sharing information with us. There is information there. But when he says, "Learn of me," what he says, then what he follows with that is, "Learn of me, for I am humble and meek and lowly." Did you catch that? I am. There is a sense of being there that Jesus wants to teach us. He doesn't so much want to teach us information. Yes, that's right, and there's a place for that. But what Jesus is trying to show you is a way of being, a way of becoming. What Jesus wants to show us is how to live our lives. Jesus says, "I have come that they may have life to the full," this abundant life, a full life. Jesus wants to show us a way of living that will lead to flourishing. How about that? How many of you want that? come on, when I hear that and I say, Jesus can show me how to flourish in my life, I mean, who doesn't want to flourish? I want to flourish. This is what Jesus is teaching us. Jesus is teaching us a way of living. It is a lifestyle. And I think that this is here, Seventh-day Adventists, this is where I think that we can make a unique contribution, not just to the Christian world, but to the world at large, to our community at large, because we as Seventh-day Adventists, part of being a Seventh-day Adventist isn't just right information. There's something else that goes along with the Seventh-day Adventist church, and that is the Adventist lifestyle. But we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But this is what Jesus is doing. Jesus is teaching us a way to live, not just a way to think, but a way to live. And so I have said this before, and I will say it again. When it comes to spiritual formation and spiritual transformation, the question is not, are you being formed, or are you being changed, or are you being transformed? Rather, the question is, who or what are you being formed into? Do you remember that same question from a few weeks back, a few months back, right? When we were talking about following, right? And we were asking you, the question isn't, are you following someone? The question is, who are you following? Do you remember that question, right? Do you remember a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, when we were talking about abiding? The question isn't, are you abiding? The question is, where are you abiding? Spiritual formation, that is the forming, the becoming, is not an option. We've all been formed spiritually since before we even came out of our mother's womb. There were influences there. Spiritual formation happens to all of us, whether we are intentional about it or not. It's happening. And so here you'll see a few people on the screen. And what I did is I asked AI, I think we need to come up with, I Googled it. Well, I AI'd this, and I said, give me a list of the top 10 biographies or memoirs, best-selling memoirs that are out there. I think I even said all time, but I don't know, that's kind of weird because it's really just recently. But so that's what this is, the top 10. Top 10 best-selling biographies and memoirs. And the people that you see on the screen, they have been formed over a long period of time through a complex alchemy of genetic inheritance, family patterns, childhood wounds, education, habits, decisions, relationships, inner orientations, attitudes, environments, responses to said environments, and a whole slew of other kinds of variables. And what's fascinating is that there are millions of people who are interested to know how these individuals have been formed and how these individuals became who they eventually became, or how they became who they are today. Newport Richie, you have been formed already. You are being formed right now. Through various experiences in the days to come, you will be formed. Formation will happen to you with zero conscious decision on your part. But listen here, but formation into the person of love in Christ Jesus will not happen automatically with zero effort. To be formed into a person of love in Christ, for that you must choose. And you must keep choosing day after day to be formed into the image of Christ, to be formed into people of love and people of hope and people of joy and people of peace. You will have to apprentice under Jesus, and you will have to learn of Jesus, and you will have to follow his process of training. And so while I just shared with you the top 10, selling biographies and memoirs, we actually have 4 biographies that are about Jesus. Do you know what those 4 biographies are? The Gospels of Mark, the Gospels of Matthew, the Gospels of Luke, the Gospel of John. If you want to know about your rabbi, about becoming like your rabbi and how your rabbi became who he was and how we can learn from him and become like our rabbi, ultimately, you have to immerse yourselves in the biographies of Jesus. And so I'm going to end my sermon right here. I don't know if this is true or not. Typically, before I say things, I like to get them verified, but I didn't do that this time, so I'm open to feedback if what I'm just about to share with you is kind of far off here or not. But a disclaimer, it was a professor from Southern that shared this with me. So I'm sharing with you what he shared with me. Whether there's some value there or not, I don't know, but I'll share it with you. I'll let you guys discuss it. One day in one of our classes on church growth, we were talking about the grain of Christianity. I don't know if you know what that is, the grain. There's also another phenomenon called the browning of Christianity. The grain of Adventism is that there have been studies that have been made, and it indicates that the average age of Seventh-day Adventist Church membership in North America, in Europe, in Australia is, and don't quote me on this one, but it's somewhere in the 50s. It's like, I don't know, 56 or 57 or 58 years old. That is, the average member in a Seventh-day Adventist church in North America is in their mid to late 50s, and that's why we call it the grain of Adventism, right? That church is getting older. Unlike the Seventh-day Adventist church in parts of Latin America or parts of Africa or Asia, where I think like the average age of Seventh-day Adventists in those countries is like in their 30s or something like that. But in the Western world, North America, Europe, Australia, there's a grain taking place. And so, we talk about this, well, how can we get young people to come to church? And we're losing our young people. And, it's kind of what we heard. 18, right? They leave the house, they leave the church, they don't come back. There's a gap of young adults in the Seventh-day Adventist church, So we were discussing this in our church growth class. And our professor, what he said is he had a different take on the grain of Adventism. What my professor said was this. He said, this is the reason, he says, I believe that the majority of members in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America and Europe and Australia, this is the reason why I believe the majority of church members in the Western world are elderly. And this is what he said. Are you guys ready for it? All right. I don't know if it's true or not. That's what my professor said. He said, I believe the reason why is because they have spent almost an entire century becoming a person. They have spent almost an entire century being formed. And through strange, invisible, chemical reactions of habit, of mindsets, of chosen attitudes, of life circumstances, of suffering, of success, of failure, of random events, our senior members in our church, they have become who they are after almost a century. He says the nearness of death is simply a seal on the trajectory of their way of life, the life that they have been living, the life that they have been coming. Death is simply a seal on the trajectory of their way of life. And in the process of living, that is our senior members and our elderly members, in the process of living, they have come to realize that there's only one hope for humanity. And that is Christ. That is Jesus. Our senior members, they have lived long enough to see every trend imaginable in society. They have seen the ebbs and flows of society. They have seen nations rise. They have seen nations fall. They have seen politicians come here and give us promises like ropes of sand. They have seen the implementation of various economic ideals and social initiatives and strategies. The young are still too young to know any better. They're still idealistic about this world and the direction of this world, and they don't know any better. The young are still trying to figure life out. But the old have already figured it out, and it is Christ. Christ as the only hope, Christ as the only solution for our world, Christ as the only way. It may have taken them a lifetime to come to that conclusion, but that's where they are. It reminds me a little bit about what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. Solomon, who tried everything under the sun, and at the end of it all, he says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of mankind. Spiritual formation is similar to aging, very gradual. It takes place over a lifetime at an incremental, at times imperceptible rate. Yes, we experience periods of dramatic change like birth or adolescence, but those key inflection points are the exception, not the rule. The formation of the human soul, Newport Richie. The formation of the human soul does not take place at the speed of light or at the digital speed or the speed of the click of a button on the internet. The formation of the human soul, it takes a lifetime. Now, does that sound familiar or not? For those of you who are immersed in classic Adventist terminology or traditional terminology, there's a phrase that we have out there. It's phrased a little bit different than the formation of the human soul, but we call it sanctification. Have you heard that one? Have you heard that phrase? The work of sanctification is not the work of a moment. Have you heard it? It's not the work of a moment. It's not the work of an hour. It's not the work of a day. It is the work of a lifetime. The formation of the human soul. Newport Richie, you are becoming a person. You're becoming someone that is unavoidable. And you're going to end up somewhere in life that is unavoidable. Why not become a person who is pervaded by the love of God in Christ Jesus? Why not become a person who is formed in his image? How many of you want to be a part of that process today?